On April 10, 1912, the Titanic, the largest ship ever built, set sail from the port of Southampton, England. It was her maiden voyage and had 2,223 people on board. The majestic and dazzling ship had a total cost of $7 million at the time, about $200 million today. It only had 20 lifeboats, but who cared? The Titanic was an unsinkable luxury liner. However, on the night of April 14th, a striking sound surprised them all. The Titanic had hit an iceberg, and then the unthinkable happened. The flawless ocean giant sank into the deep waters of the ocean. In Jesus' day, the temple in Jerusalem was considered an invulnerable structure. On the Tuesday before the crucifixion, at sunset, Jesus came out of the temple, and one of his disciples said to him, "Master, see what stones and what building." He was right. Some of those stones weighed hundreds of tons, and their pillars were so imposing in diameter that it would take 3 men with arms outstretched and holding hands to span one of them. But Jesus replied that of that majestic structure there would not be left one stone upon another. Sabbath School Like presents the series The Book of Mark. Lesson 10, The Last Days. On leaving the temple, Jesus and his disciples went to the Mount of Olives, and the Master sat looking toward the temple. Then Peter, Andrew, James, and John came around. Do you remember what they asked him?
Tell us, when will that happen?
And what will be the sign that everything is about to be fulfilled?
Listen up. According to the disciples' reasoning, the destruction of the temple and the end of the world were to be one and the same event. But Jesus knew that they were two different and separate events. So in his answer, which is in Mark 13, he referred to all that his people would have to face from those days until his second coming. So this week's question is, what did Jesus warn his people about the different generations? First, the first generation. Do you know what a panoramic picture is?
A photo where we can see the whole surroundings.
Plus, it is taken with a wide-angle lens.
That's right. Panorama comes from the Greek pan, meaning all, and orama, meaning view. The first thing Jesus does in verses 5 to 8 is to show us a panoramic picture of the future: false Christs, wars, earthquakes, famines, riots. These things would begin to happen in those days and would increase until the time of the end. That is, it extends to all generations of Christians from those days until the second coming. But from verse 9 on, Jesus changes the lens of the camera and shows 3 pictures of more specific moments in history. The first of these pictures could be titled The First Generation of Christians. It was what most directly concerned the disciples. They would be persecuted, handed over to councils, scourged in the synagogues, brought before kings, betrayed by their family, and hated by all. All this because of the need to preach the gospel to all nations. But at verse 14, Jesus warns them about something unimaginable.
When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it does not belong, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains.
What was the Master referring to? To something that the prophet Daniel had announced centuries before. The people of a prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. This prince, also called the Desolator in the same prophecy, refers to Roman General Titus, who in 70 AD led the destruction of Jerusalem, leaving not one stone upon another in the temple. But Jesus had given the sign to flee when they saw the abomination of desolation. A few years before the Great Destruction, when the Romans set pagan banners in Israel, the Christians remembered the Master's words and fled. And boy, was it worth it, for they were saved from a destruction where more than 1 million people died. Did you notice? Jesus was saving future lives 3 days before giving his own life on the cross. Second, to the following generations. Beginning in verse 19, Jesus shows a second picture focused on a great tribulation that his people would face at a time when the disciples would no longer be there.
Those days will be days of tribulation such as never were, since the beginning of the creation which God created, even to this time, neither shall be.
Listen up. Here, Jesus shifts his narrative to the future tense, thus pointing to events distant from his time. Do you remember that Prophet Daniel also spoke of a great tribulation experienced by God's people in chapter 7 and 8 of his book?
Yes, A religious political power would persecute God's people.
For a time, times, and half a time.
That's right. This prophetic period of 3.5 years, or 1260 days, is equivalent to 1260 literal years and extended from 538 AD to 1798 AD. During this period, the power symbolized in prophecy by a little horn persecuted and killed those who remained faithful to the word of God. That great tribulation would be so hard that the Lord said in verse 20 that if he had not shortened those days, no one would be saved. But for the sake of the ones he chose, he shortened those days. And so it was. The rise of the Protestant Reformation shortened that time of affliction for God's people. And Jesus also warned that generation that false Christs and false prophets would arise. It also happened, for the leaders of this persecuting power claimed to be the substitutes of Christ on earth. And under that premise, they demanded absolute obedience or death. But the true children of God were not deceived because Jesus warned them, and in verse 21 told them, do not believe them. Jesus was protecting his followers in future generations, 3 days away from being unprotected by the generation of the moment. And third, to the generations of the last days. The third picture is the one concerning the generations of the last days.
After that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers that are in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory.
The fulfillment of this prophecy occurred with 3 events that marked the beginning of the end time. The dark day. On May 19th, 1780, an unusual darkening of the sky was observed for almost the entire day over a large section of North America. It was not an eclipse, the dark moon. On the night of that same May 19th, the light of the moon was veiled, as the sun had been during the day. The meteor shower. On November 13th, 1833, there occurred what can undoubtedly be considered the largest meteor shower in history. What would happen after these phenomena?
The second coming of Christ.
In the clouds, with great power and glory.
Exactly. And why hasn't he come? Listen up. When the Lord states in verse 30 that this generation will not pass away until all these things take place, he is referring to the first picture. The destruction of Jerusalem would occur in the days of the disciples. But when he says in verse 32 that of that day and hour no one knows, he is referring to the third picture, the day of his second coming. We do not know what day he will return, but we do know from the signs that it is near. Just before that, disciples showed the alleged glory of the temple to Jesus, and Jesus responded by saying that not one stone of the temple would be left upon another. A poor widow was dropping 2 small coins into the treasury. The rich had dropped in a lot more money, but Jesus said that she had given it all. That is what was expected of that generation. It is what Jesus expected of the following generations, and it is what Jesus expects of our generation. He gave everything for us. The disciples gave everything for him. Many Christians of past generations did the same, and we who are part of the generations before his second coming are also called to give everything for him. For in just a little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. Sabbath School Like invites you to continue studying the series, The Book of Mark. Attention, all our followers. The materials from Sabbath School Like are being published alternately on our new channel, Sabbath School Like Plus. In a few weeks, this new channel will be the only place where you can find our content. Subscribe now to the new channel and don't miss anything.